Yeah, we know what we're doing. Our speaker of the hour is the one that stood up first, Denny Petrillo. You know, the Bible Institute here is incredibly blessed to have, as our president, someone with the ability as an exegete that Denny Petrillo has. His knowledge of the original languages of the Bible is incredible indeed. You know, I have in my office, I have all of the tools for studying Greek that I acquired while I was a student here, and now I have Logos Bible software on my computer, and right next door I have one of the leading experts in Logos. Sometimes it's just easier to walk across the hall and ask Denny, what does this word mean? And I don't think I'm the only one that does that either. But we are very blessed to have Denny. Denny holds a Bachelor of Arts in Bible from Harding University, a Master of Arts in New Testament from Harding Graduate School of Religion, and then a PhD in Religious Adult Education from the University of Nebraska. He is very talented, as I said, and very well respected, well traveled. He's an author and does just a great number of things to the glory of God and to the benefit of his kingdom. You know, I've been looking forward to this introduction for some time. He made me a little nervous when he told me before we started that he wanted to go ahead and get this one kicked off, because I have been looking forward to this introduction. Then he gets up before I do, and it's like, I'm going to say this sometime today. In preparing for this introduction, I kept thinking about Mark Hanstein, and I really wish that Mark could have been with us here this weekend, but he was unable. But I remember the introductions that Mark used to give of Denny, and Denny and Mark grew up together on the same street, as a matter of fact. And Mark always had these great embarrassing stories that he could tell about Denny. And I lamented somewhat the fact that I hadn't grown up with Denny, so I didn't have the time, all that much time, to acquire these stories. And then I learned over time, you don't have to be around Denny all that long to come up with many embarrassing stories. But I'm not going to share any of those. I do want to say this, and then I'll turn it over to Denny. Bear Valley has a great reputation around the brotherhood. Bear Valley is today what it is today, primarily because of Denny Petrillo. And I think all of us that work with him and go to school under him understand that blessing. And so, Denny, come preach the word.
Thank you, Donnie. I appreciate that very much. Why am I so nervous when these guys introduce me? It's like it's payback time or something. Matthew chapter 10, the words of Jesus. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be shrewd as serpents, innocent as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the courts, scourge you in their synagogues, and you shall even be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. And then a little bit later he says, and brother will deliver up brother to death. And a father, his child, and children will rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all on account of my name. But it is the one who has endured to the end who will be saved. But whenever they persecute you in this city, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you shall not finish going through the cities of Israel till the Son of Man comes. And then, dropping down a few more verses, Jesus says, therefore, do not fear them. Matthew chapter 10 is a text about fear. And Jesus, as he is preparing the disciples to go out, he wants them to recognize that it's not going to be easy sailing. But there are going to be challenges and difficulties to the work that they have to do. Now, you may have seen some of these memes. that the phrase "do not fear" is written in the Bible 365 times. Have you seen that? Well, I was surprised at how many there are of those. The problem is, you know what I'm about to say, right? It's not true. It's not true. The Bible does not say, "do not fear," or "fear not," or "do not be afraid," or some combination of that 365 times. Now, using the Logos Bible software, and I used my Logos expert, Michael Height, to look at this, and we came up with 109 times in all of the Bible that you've got that phrase or a combination thereof. Now, maybe not 365, but 109 is still a lot, isn't it? 109 is still driving home a point that the Bible does make frequently. And that is this idea of fear. And when we think about the command, "fear not," it is a very clear directive that our God is given to us today because He knows, He created us, what fear does to a person. Fear paralyzes. Fear stymies. Fear is one that is a preventative. Fear is not a good thing when we look at these various texts. And that's why you've got Bible characters in the Bible that, like Joshua, that don't be afraid. But yet we do recognize in the climate today, which is in part why this lectureship is themed like it is. Because there's a lot of things that could create anxiety and fear in us today. A lot of things. And when we think about inflation, and we think about hate crimes, and we think about war in the Ukraine and the threat of nuclear arsenal and governmental corruption, and on and on and on we could go, it could drive someone to the fetal position in fear. There's a lot going on that is unsettling. There's a lot going on that can create fear in our lives. But in this amazing text in Matthew chapter 10, as Jesus is teaching the disciples, preparing them for ministry, He is making some very important points to them, and I hope to us this afternoon, regarding the idea of fear. Jesus says in that text that a disciple is not above his master. He says that in verse 24, Matthew chapter 10. When Jesus is making the point, He is teaching us a lesson about our relationship. Now, let's keep it in context of fear and how being a disciple is connected with the idea of fear. A disciple is who we are, and a disciple is not above his teacher. Well, we need to understand as disciples, we're following Jesus where He leads us. And He leads us to places that are going to be challenging. He leads us to places that are going to be fear-inspiring circumstances and situations. Did He not just tell them that you're going to face bitter persecution? People are going to hate you. But if you're a disciple is a follower, and a disciple is going to go where Jesus leads. He also says in that same text, a disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above his master. A slave is not going to expect better treatment than the master is going to receive. A slave is not going to anticipate cutting a break, getting some passes. When the master is going to be mistreated, the slave could pretty much bet that he's going to be mistreated as well. And so we need to understand our connection to Jesus. We are his servant. We're doing what he wants us to do. And he's not going to say, now this is what I want you to do, but if you're afraid, don't worry about it. I'll get someone else to do it. No, we're servants. Servants do what the master says. And that includes being delivered up by men to courts, being scourged in their synagogues, that you're going to be brought before very important people. You're going to face persecution. We also need to understand consequences of being a disciple and being a servant, and that is hatred. Did you notice that Jesus says, it's enough for the disciple that he become as his teacher and the slave his master. If they have called the head of the house Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household? If they're going to call me Beelzebul, which was the most despicable, insulting term that could have been used. They're calling Jesus the devil. They're calling him to be satanic driven. And if they're going to say that about Jesus, don't even think for a minute that they're going to hesitate calling you out, calling you names, saying things about you. And so we need to understand that there is something about our connection with Jesus that leads us into danger, that leads us into persecution. And so that's why he makes the statement that the household can expect the same treatment as the master of the household. So the bottom line is the disciple is not above his master, the servant above his Lord. They hated Jesus, they're going to hate you. As Jesus is preparing them for the reality of this treatment, he's reminding them and he's leading them to the statement that we're focusing on this afternoon, and that is the idea of fear. And that's why when we get to verse 26, therefore, do not fear them. Now, wait a minute. Everything Jesus said up to that point is reason to fear. Persecution and, rejection from people, but everything, reason to fear. But Jesus says don't. Don't fear them. Because he goes on and he says, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the darkness, speak in the light, and what you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim upon the housetops. Now, there are a number of interesting truths that can be derived from the statement that Jesus makes when he says, let me tell you why you shouldn't fear. First of all, you shouldn't fear because God knows everything that's going on. There's nothing hidden, that nobody is going to do anything to you that God's going to wait. I missed that. What happened? No, he knows exactly what happened to you. Now, as children of God, do you find comfort in that thought? Yes, sir. That God knows that if you're being treated poorly, if people hate you, if people persecute you, God is well aware of every little thing that happens. And the second point that he's making is, so just go do the work. There's nothing hidden that's not going to be revealed. There's nothing going on here that is secret stuff. We've got work to do, and we are not going to let fear be the barrier that keeps us from doing what needs to be done. That's God's plan for us. So, the fourth lesson is Jesus didn't fear. Neither should we. If he's our master and we're the slave, if he's our teacher and we're his disciples, then we follow him and he pressed forward without fear. And when you read the Gospels, you can see that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes were very intimidating, very powerful men. They could do what they wanted to do. We see examples of that through the pages of the Gospels. So they, on numerous occasions, were ready to kill Jesus on the spot. And they knew they could pull it off. And Jesus says, I'm going to do the work. He did not worry about things. He just pressed on in fear. And then we get to our primary verse. Verse 28. Do not fear those who kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. When we look at this text, we have got to understand the word fear and the meaning of fear. There are some lexicographers that have defined the word fear as respect or reverence. That is not the meaning of the word fear. Either in the Greek text, which is the word phobos, we know that word from phobias. You say, I'm anacrophobic. Does that mean you've got a respect for spiders? Probably not. It's way past that. All right. It's fear. It's a phobia. It's a terror. It's a fright. Well, that's the word. And the Hebrew equivalent is Y-A-R-E. Yare is how it's pronounced. And it's the same idea. And it's not the idea of reverence. There are different Greek words for that, different Hebrew words for reverence and respect. And in the manuscript in the book, I've documented those for you if you're interested. So understand what Jesus is saying is because you are afraid of men. They scare you. They threaten you. And they're creating this anxiety within for the purpose of getting you to cower, to getting you to cave, to getting you to behaving the way they want you to behave. That's what fear does. But it's not going to change the truth. Jesus is saying when he talks about don't fear because there's nothing covered that will not be revealed, nothing hidden that will not be known. The truth is what it is. And our behavior, good or bad, still doesn't change the fact that truth is from God and is going to remain the truth. And so now our allegiance needs to be clearly known. Are we with the truth or not? And if we're with the truth, then we understand that being with the truth is going to involve our not caving to fear. We also need to understand that it doesn't change the declaration of the truth. That Jesus is not giving the disciples in Matthew 10 a pass on the declaration of truth. He got through telling them that it's going to be bad. There's going to be families that are going to deliver up family members to death. But you need to press on. You need to do the work. It's not going to change. It should not change the declaration of the truth. So he says, do not fear those who kill the body. You know, Jesus in this text and in several other texts, but especially in this text, is trying to get us to have a proper perspective on things like your body. And it's so easy for us to be enamored with our personal comforts. And there have been several speakers in this lectureship who have correctly identified the wealth that we enjoy in this nation and the physical comforts that we enjoy, the medical advances, the nice houses, the nice cars, the nice clothes. We're very comfortable people. And so if something is going to threaten the body, that is really hitting close to home because of the environment in which we live. And that's not always a good thing. because it can be a dangerous thing because we end up doing exactly what Jesus is telling us not to do here. Don't fear those who can kill the body. Notice how Jesus goes to the extreme example. He doesn't even mess with those that could persecute you, those that can inflict pain on you, those that can do something like that might break a bone, take out an eye. No, he goes to the extreme. Those who can kill you. They can snuff out your life. And they've got that power, and they've got that kind of anger that they would do that. And so what are you going to do? Well, what did people do throughout history is some of them caved. Some of them caved. And Jesus saying, don't fear those who can kill the body. He says, they're not unable. Don't fear those who are unable to kill the soul. Now we're ratcheted it up a little bit, a notch higher in thinking about the importance that each one of us have. The truth of the matter is your body and my body are not that important. God designed them to grow old. God designed them to die. God designed them to return to dust. But your soul, that's a whole different topic. And there is nothing, literally, nothing that you have or I have that's more valuable than a soul. Matter of fact, in a few chapters, in Matthew chapter 16, Jesus is going to walk the disciples through that very point. And he's going to talk about what will a man give in exchange for his soul if he gained the whole world and forfeited his soul. You have nothing more valuable than the soul, including literally everything, all the gold, all the silver, all the people, all the land, all everything. And your soul is still much more valuable than all of that. Don't fear those who can't touch the most important, precious thing that you've got, and that's your soul. But lesson number 7 is do fear him who is able to destroy both the body and soul in hell. All right, so notice how Jesus has made a switch. Up to this point, he's been saying, don't fear, don't fear, don't fear. And then all of a sudden he says, now do fear him who is able to destroy both the body and the soul in hell. You know, it's always important for us to keep the main thing the main thing. It's always important for us to make sure that our priorities are in line, that we're practicing Matthew 6:33, and we're seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Amen. But when we get things messed up, that's when things get really messed up. Not only in the present world, but into eternity. God has a power over you and me that no one else has. A power over the body, that puts him on par with what men could do. But a power over the soul that is far surpasses what men can do. And therefore Jesus says, fear him. Now, isn't that interesting that God now is saying, I want you to fear me. Now let's go back to our definition that we just talked about, phobos and Yahweh, the idea of a fright, a terror, a dread. There is a place for our understanding of that with God. He's great, we're not. He's all-powerful, we're not. We are going to appear before him on judgment seat, before the judgment seat of Christ, to be judged, 2 Corinthians 5:10. And we can't do anything to stop it. Fear him, because he is the one who is worthy of that kind of fear. Jesus goes on. And again, if you're thinking contextually, what does this have to do with anything? He says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Jesus is talking about relative value. A sparrow was sold for a couple of pennies, was close to worthless. And it was sold for food to the very poorest of people. Not a whole lot of meat on a sparrow, but that's all they could afford. God knew all about that, and he also knew about the bird. He also knew about the sparrow, and not one of them falls to the ground, not one of them dies without God knowing. And then he talks about the hairs of your head are numbered. You know, the average person has between 100,000 and 120,000 hairs on their head. And God knows exactly how many you have. Now, some of us have made that a lot easier on God. He doesn't need to spend near as long counting. But if God knows that you have 120,000 hairs, what does that tell you? What is the point about that, and what does it have to do with the idea of fear? You see, because if we were the ones that was writing the script for Jesus to give to the disciples on that day, we probably would have said, fear him who can kill both the body and soul in hell, because you're going to appear before him, and he's a God that can be wrathful and angry and going to punish those who are disobedient. And Jesus doesn't even go there. He goes to, let's talk about a sparrow and talk about the hairs on your head. What does that have to do with fear? Well, what it has to do with fear is that Jesus is letting us know you are so valuable to God that should give you a boldness, a confidence to press on no matter what lies ahead. No matter what challenges we might face, God knows, God cares, God knows the minutia about me, about my life, about my struggles, and so I'm just going to press on. So how do you spell fear? Do you spell fear, forget everything and run? Or do you spell fear, face everything and rise? Jesus is challenging us to spell it, face everything, and rise. We have a challenge to overcome fear. And as we started this lesson, we pointed out there's a lot to be afraid of. There are a lot of things that can rock our world and create that uncertainty. But we've got to overcome fear. Why? Fear has impacted our evangelism. There have been those that are afraid of rejection, afraid of the response, afraid of what someone's going to say, afraid of losing a job, afraid of losing a friendship, afraid. And so you never make the step. Fear in evangelism has been a horrible oil and water combination. It doesn't work. We have to have the boldness to go ahead and do what needs to be done and face the consequences, whatever they may be. Well, what may they be? Well, Jesus said, you might be delivered up to courts. You might be scourged. You're going to find rejection. You're going to be hated. But we can't let fear keep us from doing the evangelistic work. Fear has impacted our giving. Because we're so nervous about the present economic climate, we might say, well, I'm afraid that if I don't work extra hours, then I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. Or I'm afraid that if I don't work on Saturday or work on Sunday, and well, it impacts our giving. I'm afraid of what is going to happen with the uncertain economic climate, and so I'm not going to give quite as liberally as I might otherwise. And so fear has impacted what we're doing. You know, we endured that at the Bible Institute. When COVID hit and students were trying to raise support and present students were trying to keep support, there were individuals and congregations that were bailing. we're just kind of uncertain about things right now. And so we're sorry, but we're going to have to cut your support. Fear was that which really hurt the liberal giving of God's people. We've got to overcome that. Third, fear has impacted our service. Just getting out there and doing the work. Fear has impacted our serving God because we're afraid of that rejection. We're afraid of the climate that we might create in a workplace or in the neighborhood or in the supermarket or in the restaurant. We don't serve because of fear. Maybe we're afraid of the kind of rejection that we would run into. And so we don't serve, even though Ephesians 2 and verse 10 makes it very clear that we are created to serve God. And then fourth, fear has impacted our peace. The peace that surpasses all understanding. But when we're allowing the world events to rock our world, it is a peace destroyer. When we're afraid of what's going to happen next, we're afraid of, we have a school in the Ukraine. We've been staying in close contact with the director of our school, Terry Harmon, and our students in our school, and the teachers in our school. And you want to talk about a world getting rocked. Talk about our brethren in Ukraine. But yet, it is amazing the peace that they have found in God. When you've got bombs exploding all around you and being fired above your heads, and you are under a constant threat of you're hearing the sirens going off, that's kind of hard to be at peace. But our brethren have fallen to their knees and they've prayed to God and they have trusted Him and relied on Him and found that peace that surpasses all understanding that Paul's talking about in Philippians 4 and verse 6. So, the value of fear, because Jesus did change and say, fear God. According to Proverbs chapter 1, fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Later on, he's going to say, beginning of wisdom in 9:10, the beginning of knowledge in Proverbs 1:7. That's the starting point. You start with fearing God. And when you start with fearing God, then what happens after that is going to be good. The wisdom that you have, the knowledge that you attain is going to be something that will be conditioned and impacted by that fear of God. We look at today so many scientists that are atheists, are agnostics, that are arriving at conclusions that there is no God, or if there is a God, He is one that is distant and disconnected. You're not going to arrive at a good place if you don't start with God. No, if you don't start with fearing God. Fearing God is the beginning, so says the wise man Solomon. The value of fear, secondly, is that it impacts evangelism. Paul said it very clearly in 2 Corinthians. He said, therefore, knowing the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. God's not kidding when He said there's a judgment day coming. God wasn't joking when He said all men are going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ to be judged according to the deeds that they've done in the body, whether good or evil. Jesus wasn't joking when He said an hour comes when all who are in the tomb shall hear His voice and come forth. Those who did the evil deeds to a resurrection of judgment, those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life. Therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we persuade men. If we have the value of fear, then we use it as fuel for evangelism. We use it as something that we recognize as we look into the faces of those co-workers, and we look into the faces of those neighbors, and the people at the restaurant, the people at the grocery store, and we say, knowing the fear of the Lord, I need to talk to you about your soul, about your eternal destiny. So now we see that there are two reasons to do that. One is because I fear God, and He's commanding me to do that. But I also am afraid of what's going to happen to people that are not found in Christ come Judgment Day. And then third, the value of fear is it's a fearful thing, the Hebrews writer says, to fall into the hands of the living God. You know, we had the picnic yesterday, and right by the picnic is Columbine High School. And those of us that have lived in Colorado during that terrible day, when 2 students went into Columbine High School and shot up their school, killed 12 of their classmates and a teacher. And you think, I wonder if Harris and Claybold, what they would say now about that day. What they would say now about God. Hitler is said in World War II to have taken the lives of 6 million Jews. I wonder if someone had said to Hitler regarding God, be afraid. Be very afraid. When we think about the evil that's in our world and the things that people are doing, the Hebrew writer makes it very clear it's a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. God is not kidding. And those that are making choices that are in defiance of His word and His will and His way are not going to find a God of love. But they're going to find a God of wrath. Paul said it very clearly to the Romans in Romans chapter 2, verse 4 and following, that there's going to be a day of wrath and a revelation of the righteous judgment of God. It is a day of wrath. That's what Paul called it, by inspiration. And so there is an angry God that is going to be directed to those who have not lived their life in fear. So what do we make of all this? This is the conclusion. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. There's the assurance. There's the boldness. There's the confidence that we have that God says, just press forward. Do what I'm asking. Don't let fear impact what you do in your service, your love, your evangelism, your giving to me. I'm your God. I love you. I'm with you. I care for you. And I'm going to take care of you. And there's the assurance that we have. Brothers, sisters, in a world like we live in today, the last thing that God needs is a bunch of fearful people in His church. But we have a God that loves us, encourages us. Do not be afraid.